because he's the custodian of these laws, so to speak. He's responsible for ensuring that they are properly executed and implemented. An executive order is simply a directive to say that, see, you need to faithfully execute these laws.
And then the question I asked Garbashew is this. We have seen the mechanism of a temporary freeze of assets, financial or real estate, being deployed by the anti-corruption agencies, EFCC and ICPC. We have seen it at play.
Of course.
With regard to individuals and then also with regard to state governments, you know, in recent times. That's what I'm saying, that was already work in progress. So why then did you need this added velocity?
Basically to reinvigorate the application of these laws. Basically, that's it.
I think what the barrister is trying to explain, you know, if I understood him, is actually the fact that there's need for enforcement, and the president has that power, you know, to reinforce, so that a particular policy or law could be effectively utilized to achieve its main objective. Okay. Now, another issue here is that Nigerians are beginning to...
Hold on a second. The point, though, is the executive order itself was clear that all of these directives will have to be implemented within the ambit of the law.
Absolutely.
That's right, within the ambit of the law. In other words, that executive was not purporting to take over or usurp the powers of either the legislature or of the judiciary.
Now, that brings us to this question now. On what basis, you know, do you think that the court validated that order? Because, of course, there was a court ruling on that. And some persons have also been noted to have returned to court, you know, questioning the judgment of the court. I don't know whether that has started, but that has taken place.
Well, to begin with, anybody that has any issues with that judgment, you know, is free to appeal if the person is in a position to appeal. But let me explain the rationale behind the court decision. Basically, what the court decision said is, we have looked at this order. It has not infringed on the doctrine of separation of power. It is only restating existing laws. Therefore, as long as the laws will be followed to the letter, we don't have any problem with it. So, for example, to give a specific example, the Honorable Judge said, for you to, you know, subject any asset to interim forfeiture, you have to eventually get a court order. You know, and that is what the executive order says. So because of some of these things, the court said this thing is constitutional. It's constitutional because it's just restating what the law has already provisioned.
But why are lawyers, professionals like you, some of them anyway, against this order?
I said it already. There is usually this suspicion, you know, by the citizenry across the world, you know, when executive orders are issued, because they take the semblance of an enactment, and in the true sense, they are not enactments. And then maybe you might say, you know, our peculiar, you know, mentality of tending to politicize things. I don't want to go into the politics of it.
All right, let's return to Malam Garba Shehu. Malam Garba, I'm sure you are aware that, of course, the reason why we are taking on this subject matter today is partly the statement you issued at the weekend, indicating that on the basis of Executive Order Number 6, President Muhammadu Buhari has directed a restriction of the movement of some 50 persons. Those persons, of course, there have been all kinds of accounts as to whether they were named or not named. We just read a story from one of the papers where you denied that the persons have been specifically identified. And that's what some observers are also pointing at. Again, looking at the letter and the spirit of Executive Order Number 6, it deals with assets and not personal liberties. So when did Executive Order Number 6 transmute into an order on the restriction of personal liberties?
Well, as I said earlier, the Constitution, of course, says government is a responsibility of the government of Nigeria, you know, to fight corruption. Now, what's the point of going through all of these processes? And in the end, you will have reached a point where the assets themselves have been dissipated. The essence of this restriction of movement is to ensure two things. One, that the beneficiaries of this corrupt proceeds of corruption do not have access, to it, so that they don't dissipate. Because, much of these things, of course, are domiciled abroad and all of that. And two, you want a situation in which you speed up the process. Essentially, this directive by the president is to help speed up the process. I told you earlier that some of these cases go back 7, 10 years back. Now, if this was my money, I don't want to say your money.
It's yours.
If this was my money, and and through my own sweat, would anyone really accept a situation in which they retain this legal acrobatics for 10 or more years, going back and forth? So therefore, if you don't have that access to it, and then the money, there is a cap on the money, and it's yours, you probably will be you will join hands with the prosecution, see whether this can be ended so speedily that you get back what legally belongs to you.
So the loopholes in our legal system is being capitalized on by the individuals in question to delay their cases in court for too long a time. That is what I'm going to understand. Because the last judgment on the former governor of Plateau State started almost 10 years ago.
11 years.
11 years, and it was just concluded this year. Yeah. So that is the point that I think Garba Shehu has made. But I want to ask you this question. Is it necessary in the first place to mention those involved? Because, of course, the names that are making rounds, and I said not to be the real names of the. Is it important now at this point, when people already have names, to release the real names of the 50 persons concerned?
No, government did not release any names at this time, and there is no intention to do so. Simply because this directive is already coming under attack for so many reasons, and the next thing you hear if you do anything like that is probably that you're already convicting people or you're trying them via media and all of that. So we don't want the people who are involved, they know themselves, and I think that we have given the clearest indication that can be given in the circumstance, which is that these are back cases. People are very familiar with them, and for the most part, Nigerians are sick and tired of following these cases. They've been there for too long.
I'm wondering, Hamza, I mean, we're going to wrap this up now because we have a second topic to discuss. But I want to repeat the question I posed to Garba Shehu with regard to whether or not the focus of Executive Order Number 6, which has to do with assets, can now transmute into a restriction of personal liberties, including the right of movement. That's one. And then secondly, what is likely to be the utility of this restriction of movement? We have seen in the past when government agencies, particularly the immigration, had tried to prevent Nigerians from traveling. You remember on this Agbakoba's case, with regard to the right of the individual to move, and then, of course, the ownership of a passport to travel. So is all of this taken into consideration? Please take this question before I come into whether persons have been named or otherwise.
Okay. Well, it depends from which perspective, the whole issue is viewed. But to simplify it, the courts, as well as law enforcement agencies, have the discretion and powers to grant bail on certain terms and conditions. So you can easily say that the executive order is saying that you can include maybe the submission of one's passports as part of bail conditions. You can view it as such. And it will now amount to a restriction of movement. So within legal parameters, there's capability for that. There is capability for that. So that's my own
this
humble
when
opinion.
you say,
is about
Kiran, I'm coming. Just a minute.
Yes.
When you say within the legal acceptability, that normally will be through the judicial process, not by way of
No,
executive
for example,
orders.
EFCC, if EFCC is investigating someone now, they can release the person on bail under certain conditions. One of such conditions will be deposit your international passport with us. Simple. Then,
Now, do
by
we
implication, there's restriction.
Fine, yeah, that's right. But do we know the length of time this restriction of movement of some 50 persons or so might last?
Well, I don't know whether it applies to these 50 persons, but I'm just telling you that within the legal framework, within the applicable laws, there is room for restriction of movement. I'm not saying that these 50 persons have been restricted.
But
I don't know about that.
This restriction issue is just for you not to step outside Nigeria.
Obviously,
that's what it means.
obviously.
It doesn't mean you not get around Nigeria itself, so that people will begin to understand what the restriction really, means. It's not that you will move around Nigeria.
And is there the restriction per se? Is it like an upfront restriction? Because we need to be careful.
Yeah, and then the last point, because when Executive Order number 6 was released, there were two schedules to the order. The first schedule, of course, dealt with the ongoing cases to which Garba Shehu referred, cases that have dragged on for so many years. We thought, the stories that came out after your statement tended to have taken their bearing from those cases listed in the first schedule, with regard to the persons, of course, Governor Suswan, former Governor Suswan of Benue, former Governor, for instance, of Jigawa, of Chimaroku Namani, and then, of course, Niger, and several other persons. Alex Bade was former Chief of Defense Staff, plus, of course, one or two persons who are now said to be deceased, and all of that. So, are we expecting further clarification with regard to matters arising from Executive Order number 6 with respect to the statement you issued over the weekend says 50 persons have now been restricted from traveling outside the country? So that there's more clarity.
At every point, obviously, if it is warranted, government has no reason to hold back information. And you know that, of course, by virtue also of FOI, the Freedom of Information Act, people, individuals with the bona fide reason can access, information following the processes of court. These matters are domiciled in the, immigration and the security services. And I'm sure that those who think Kingsley is certainly not there, so we can...
Thank you very much. Well, many Nigerians are also taking their own bearing on this, and of course telling us how they feel about the Executive Order number 6. We have Mobola here now. He says the Executive Order number 6 is a move in the right direction. It will definitely send signals to those who think the fight against corruption is being fought selectively. An abnormal political situation should be solved abnormally. Even in the developed world, such policies operate.
This is from Festus Akimboyo. It says, Executive Order number 6 shows that the federal government has taken the fight against corruption to another level and should be welcomed by Nigerians. Those who are innocent should not be afraid. Any policy that can help weaken the monster of corruption that has caused untold damage to our country is welcome.
All right, Mike Anyako has a different view here. He says the Executive Order number 6 banning 50 Nigerians with corruption cases from traveling out of the country is coming very late, especially when we are preparing for general elections. The number of persons restricted is far below expectations based on the magnitude of corruption in Nigeria. Every concern must be taken to ensure that it does not cause chaos in the polity, and those with cases of corruption must be included in the list, irrespective of political affiliations.
And this is from Dele Jack Solomon. Politics aside, the implementation of Executive Order number 6 is a welcome development. This is because the order will prevent persons accused of corruption from continuously holding onto and controlling assets acquired from corruption.
All right, Oshomole says the travel ban is a sad reminder of the reckless placement of political opponents on security watch list and seizure of their passports by the defunct military junta. Let the court be the one to restrict travel.
Well, that one was from Oshiomhole. It's not the APC chairman Oshiomhole who is tweeting. And assuming they, of course, these are similar names, the spelling of this one is not exactly the way Oshiomhole spells his.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a major difference to note there. Sani by Kolomakoji tweets, now, how can the excesses of Executive Order 6 be checked? And to Garba Shehu, don't you think that this order will bring about redundancy of some agencies, as it appears the ICPC and EFCC were also doing something similar in that direction before now?
All right, and Chris Simeon says, well, the coming of Executive Order number 6 on board is a welcome development. It will fish out those corrupt politicians who have looted government money. Kudos to President Muhammadu Buhari.
All right, those are the tweets that we can take. The question posed by Sandy Makolomakoji is one that we had asked in the course of this conversation with our guests as to whether or not this is not a surplusage or superfluous piece of policy directive, given what the ICPC and EFCC themselves have been doing. Of course, there are also matters that will arise subsequently, and we will return to those issues when, of course, it becomes important for us editorially. It's on that note, we'd like to thank our two guests, Hamza Gudaji, it's a legal practitioner and a public affairs analyst. Thanks a lot for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria today. We also would like to thank the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity, Madam Garba Shehu. Garba Shehu, thanks a lot for being with us.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be taking on another issue, this time politics, the Senate and former governors seeking to take their seats therein.
The outer framers, the hat tippers, the fringe growers. You don't need to hide anymore. Try Dettol Even Tone. It cleans and helps to reduce the appearance of blemishes caused by oil, dirt, and germs, giving your skin a healthy feel for an even better you. Dettol, be 100% sure.
Dettol soap is now also available for 100 Naira only.
Can I see your particulars, sir?
Officer, my particulars no dey here.
In that case, you'll have to come with me to the police station.
Officer, which levels? Where I for find you something make you take arrange your weekend.
What? Offense number 1, driving without particulars. Offense number 2, trying to bribe an officer of the law.
I won't harass Nigerians or take bribe. Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
For years, the NTA has been promoting science, technology, arts and crafts under the tagged name National Children's Expo. We are set with another edition as we gather children around Nigeria. Junior category ages 6 to 12 and senior category ages 13 to 18. The theme for Expo 2018, achieving self-sufficiency in agriculture, meeting the challenges of security and exposition of alternative energy as pathways to national development. Date, October 21st to 25th, 2018. Venue, NTA Headquarters Arena, Area 11, Garki, Abuja. We are set to celebrate the best of innovation across the country. For more information, please call the following numbers. NTA ETV, promoting learning.
What's up?
His friends didn't come.
Hey, let's practice.
But you're going out.
Don't worry about me.
Nothing satisfies a mother more than seeing a child grow up. But I know as he sweats, he'll face the risk of germs which can cause skin irritation.
That's why you need the new best ever Dettol Cool. Its new advanced formulation with extra menthol protects from up to 100 illness-causing germs and gives your family icy cool freshness.
Growing up needs Dettol protection.
You are still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. And to kickstart our second conversation on the rising trend of governors retiring to Senate after serving out their terms, let's take this background report from our correspondent, Mitaire Iben.
About 15 senators in the current 8th Assembly of the Senate are former governors
who have served 1 or 2 terms in their states. Since Nigeria's return to democracy in 1999, it has become commonplace for governors who served 1 or 2 terms in their states to seek refuge in the Senate. Many wonder if this obsession of former governors for the Red Chamber is born out of passion for continued development of their states and senatorial districts in particular. Others see the trend as a ploy by former governors to maintain some measure of political immunity, which they enjoyed fully as governors by virtue of the immunity clause. Whatever the reason may be, many political observers regard the Nigerian political space, especially the legislature, as largely occupied by recycled politicians. The trend is not likely to stop soon, as no less than 8 governors are said to have already expressed interest in running for the Senate in the forthcoming 2019 general elections. Even some deputy governors are not left out of the frenzy for the Senate. While the Constitution does not bar any Nigerian, including governors and ex-governors, from vying for the Senate as many times as they want, political analysts are quick to point out that some governors have come to see the Senate as a place to retire politically, securing as many terms as they can get in the upper chamber. The trend has evoked some criticisms as to the performance of the former state chief executives on the floor of the Red Chamber in terms of the number of bills sponsored towards improved legislation. Are there implications of this quest by former governors to retire in the Senate? How has their participation in the Senate improved the lot of the masses in their respective states and senatorial districts? Is the trend a healthy political development? These will form part of discussions by guests on Good Morning Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much, Mitari Ikme, for that backgrounder. And just to restate that the Senate is the upper legislative chamber in the National Assembly. The other, of course, being the House of Representatives. There some persons, of course, would argue that the qualifications required for membership of the Senate, those qualifications are higher than qualifications for any other legislature in the country, including, of course, state houses of assembly. So our effort here is not to denigrate the Senate, but of course to draw attention to what has been described as a growing trend of governors immediately vacating their offices in the states and then taking refuge, as it were, in the Senate. We have guests with us here in the studios as well as at our Kaduna Network Center to join in this conversation. First, we'd like to welcome Awal Musa Rafsanjani. He's Executive Director, Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC. Rafsanjani, pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you, and good morning, Nigerians.
Also here with us in the studios, another familiar face on Good Morning Nigeria, Mazi Afam Osigwe. He's the former Secretary General of the Nigerian Bar Association. Mazi Afam, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
All right, and from our Kaduna Center, we have joining us this morning Dr. Usman Mohammed. He's the Chief Executive Officer, Center for Legislative Studies in Africa. You are welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Karen, good morning.
We're glad you can hear us very clearly, and we can hear you clearly too. Gentlemen, you're welcome to this segment of the program. Currently, we have about 15 serving senators in the 8th Assembly who are former governors of their different states. And of course, from what has taken place after the primaries concluded by all the political parties, it does appear that we should be expecting more of the ex-governors in the 9th Senate. And so has it become a trend in Nigeria that after serving out your term as a governor, that you are going to now join the Senate as, well, as Kingsley said, as a refuge or, of course, a retirement base. I'd like to begin with the man in Kaduna. Let's start with you in Kaduna over there. What do you make of the situation where governors who serve out their tenures now retire at the Senate?
Thank you very much. Inasmuch as it's their constitutional right, I believe that it is getting more populated by the governors. And as statistics have shown, with the present population of governors and those intending to come, the Senate will be populated, looking at their number 109, almost a quarter of the House. After 2023, we will see a Senate in 2027 that will be populated by almost half the Senate. What I mean here is the fact that when you look at the statistics that I have, which comes from the publication of National Institute for Policy, for Legislative Studies, 2018. This is the publication they had, headed by Ladi Hamalai, National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies. They have published these very important documents, and any researcher and any person looking for his representative and his contribution will have to get these very important documents for research. Now, having said that, when you look at the entire Senate, the composition of the Senate, and it's getting much more with governors after election, and also with deputy governors coming in, is scary. That is one thing. Secondly, when you look at even the governors that battled legislatures at their state and hindered good laws and couldn't even give a very good budget a chance to be implemented for the common man, then there is a problem for them populating the Senate. Thirdly, their contribution is important, as we see in this publication of Niels. Because when you look at the contribution of some of the governors, you can't help but hail them. For example, out of these 15 governors, only 9 governors have made serious contributions in the Senate. One of the notables is Theode Oji, who has sponsored 11 bills and 2 are passed, followed by Sam Egu, who has sponsored 8 bills, 2 are passed, followed by Darie of Plateau State, that sponsored 5 bills, 1 is passed, followed by Kabir Gaya, who is the 4th, 5 bills, 2 are passed, and then Wamako, 5 bills, 1 is passed. Abdullahi Adamu comes to the next in that ranking, who has sponsored 6 bills, 1 is passed. Then Adamu Alero sponsored 4, none is passed. Rabi Musa Konkoso sponsored 2, none is passed. Godswill Akpabio sponsored only 2, none is passed. Now, when you look at the father of them all, who was the leader of the House, Ali Indume, who is not a governor, he has sponsored 64 bills, almost about 30 passed. This is very significant. Now, what are we talking about? We are talking about a house that will be populated soon by Rochas Okorocha of Imo, who has indicated his interest, and Yari is battling to come in there. Bauchi Yugu they tried, but he has failed, but he has jumped to the APC to get that ticket next time. Ogun is coming. Oyo Ajimobi is coming. Borno Kashim Shetima is coming. Shekarau is coming from Kano. Yobe Gaidam is coming. Nasarawa, either it is Almakura or they maintain Abdullahi Adamu, as it is being battled in Nasarawa, is still governors coming. Odwan of Delta is coming. Gombe Kombo is coming. So now, when you look at 15 plus almost these 11 or 10, you make the mathematics, and it's funny. And when you look at their contribution in the Senate, they are almost, most of them are bench warmers, without, of course, with the exception of these that I have mentioned in the 8th Assembly that have made contribution. And I have important places that have made the contributions here. I've itemized them here. I have done the research. So what is important for us is to understand that they have the right to come to the Senate. Yes, they can be disenfranchised. But also, it is important for them to come clean and also to come and make serious contributions in the National Assembly. For example, the appropriation chair of the Senate is a governor from Northeast, but his contribution only comes when appropriation comes to place and when there are issues. After that, till the next year after budget is presented.
All right, Dr. Usman Mohammed, thank you very much for your opening salvo. You have raised a number of points. Well, let's return to the other two guests here with us in the Abuja studios. We'll come back to you in the course of the conversation. Rafsanjani, let's have your opening thoughts on this development that we are seeing. Former governors populating the Senate and others who are out also being in the Senate. And by the way, just to add to what Dr. Usman Mohammed said, there were also former military governors or former military administrators who are also in the Senate.
Yeah, well, like we have rightly mentioned at the beginning, it is the constitutional right of any Nigerian to aspire to be in the Senate. However, what has been happening is that, those who have, hijacked the party structure and use their, influence to make sure that they either intimidate or harass, or undermine even internal democracy within the party. They succeeded in doing that because a sitting governor, in most instances, in most places, determine and dictate who goes to other state assembly or national assembly because of the weak party structure that we have, because there's no, in most instances, no internal democracy. What you find is that imposition, within the, from the governors, that are serving in those states, So therefore, it is, really very difficult if a sitting governor wants to be a senator and then anybody will say you want to be there. You will either be intimidated, or in fact the party will not even allow you to go for that. So I think for me it is the hijack of the party instrumentality that is one, not because people really wanted that person to be there, and secondly, sometimes I think it is because we also as Nigerians we don't actually ask for accountability, demand for accountability. Most of these, legislators, especially those ones that we are talking about, deputy governors, ex-deputy governors, ex-governors, they don't even interact with really people because constituency accountability, dictate that you should actually interact with the people. And these people, they don't even want to have anything to do with anybody. So what happens is that they just use their own position, enforce themselves, whether people like it or not, they will do that. And that is why it is important, our political parties, especially, the strong political parties, they actually work out an arrangement that will ensure free and fair election, that will allow competent, honest, disciplined, patriotic Nigerians who seek to be in the House of Rep or in the Senate or in any elective position, to allow them to have a free, space to contest election rather than imposing them. Doing that will undermine the effectiveness of even the legislature itself, because some of these people, when they come, really, they don't want to discuss anything. It is an opportunity. You are a senator. You can just send a note to ministry department and many places. There are so many privileges, political privileges, and you will continue to be a godfather, So rather than really coming to do legislative work, you would just use that place to even undermine the effectiveness, the vibrancy, the independence of even that legislature. So I think it is important that our political parties and the electorate, more importantly, they should rise up to insist that only people who can actually add value to the legislative process that can actually come to the either House of Representatives or the Senate. If you allow people who have even issues of suspicion that they have looted or they mismanaged their state to come to the Senate, it is going to be a replication of what they have done also at the state level. So it is important that the political party create an enabling space for people who really want to come, not imposition, not using state powers or state, resources. You can imagine if you want to go and contest election with a governor in a particular senatorial district, who are you to even say anything? The police, the security will come and just,
Okay, all right, Awabo Afsanjani, thank you. You have made very, valid point here. Let's now go to Mazi Afam Osigwe. And I want to draw inference, from the submission of Dr. Usman Mohammed, where he made some salient points that bordered on the contribution of this caliber of Nigerian politicians who find themselves in the Senate after, completing their 2 tenures as governors. Now, do you look at the quality of their contribution, the value of what they bring in to the table at the Senate? Of course, Dr. Usman did mention, he gave us a kind of statistics of contributions of some of these governors. Now, how do you consider them? Very, consider their being there, and of course consider the fact that many are still coming. What does he portend for the Senate?
When I listened to him and he reeled out the number of bills sponsored by certain past governors past, I asked myself, what were these bills all about? How come we didn't hear the debate about these bills? How come we still don't know anything about these bills? And that brings me to the question, what is the relevance of these bills we have been told have been passed into laws? What issues have they addressed? We don't even know anything about them. And it speaks volumes about the quality of our legislature, that there's even very little public debate. Sometimes these bills, as it were, sneak into public discourse. Oh, the president has signed this bill. And you never even heard there was any debate going on about them. The public knows nothing, except in some cases where they hold ceremonial, and I say ceremonial, public hearings, where there's no robust debate and where the end result does not reflect the contributions of the people. And we need to address this issue, because if we continue this way, we would appear to be a society that rewards failure. Most of these governors failed in their states. Most of these governors did not allow the legislature to work in their states. They locked down the houses of assembly. And in most cases, it is of common knowledge that before the House will sit, the House leadership will go and consult the governor. And they will agree on what to do. And so you hear cases of budgets being passed under 15, 30 minutes. Important bills being passed into law, first, second, third reading in one day. So we should ask, what is the quality of these bills? In what areas have they addressed the nagging societal issues? Have they opened up the democratic space? In what way have they helped improve the economy and protect the rights of the people? When we even listen to the House, do we even hear them comment on issues of national importance? I'm not quite sure that the statistics may actually be a good reflection of their dynamism and constructive contribution in the legislature. Like you call this a retirement home, more or less. They go there to run to see. They do nothing. And they use state resources, like Rafsanjani has said, and state apparatus to get power, even where they failed woefully as governors. And most times, because the role money plays in politics, they find themselves there. So we need to ask that question. Yes, they have sponsored so many bills. What are they about? Of what relevance are these bills? And how come we don't even know about these bills? And how come we didn't hear about the debates leading up to the passage of these bills into law?
Afam Osigwe, thank you very much. Back again to Dr. Usman Mohammed in Kaduna. Dr. Mohammed, you listened to the reaction by Afam Osigwe. Maybe you may wish to respond to that first, but take along with it the following. In terms of interrogating legislative record and rigor, are constituents sufficiently aware that they have the right to do this? And under what have some of these former governors been hiding, to shield what you have described now as their somewhat less than salutary performance in the Senate?
Thank you very much. Now, I like the question the lawyer has put forward, and I have the answers right away with me because I did a thorough research on that. And I think that we must be careful on the way we have a sweeping condemnation about these guys. I'm not here to protect them, but then we must give them a certain benefit of doubt. Number one is the fact that if you allow, Tudo Oju on the 8/10/2015, sponsored a bill for food security, and it has passed, 2015, 810. On the issue of food security, I think that is very important, and we have to understand that. We don't have much time to discuss on this. The next to the UDI did was on the 14th of 10, 2015, Nigerian Investment Promotion Council Act, SB 72, repeal and enactment bill of 2015. It passed the first reading. National Planning Process Bill was the next on the 15th of 10 by Theodore Oji. It is in the first reading. The next and the fourth is Deep Offshore and Inland Basin Production Sharing Contracts Act 2004 Amendment Bill by Theodore Oji on the 20th of 10, 2015. The next is, of course, National Center for Disease Control and Prevention. That cannot be, of course, underestimated, which was passed. Then there is the National Energy Act Amendment by Theodore Oji. Nigerian Metallurgical Industry Act Amendment by Theodore Oji on the 16th of 6, 2016. And then National Fertilizer Quality Control Bill by Theodore Oji. Theodore Oji also had to his credit Federal College of Education Technical, Arochukwu, Abia State Bill, 2018, on 25th of January 2018. Federal Polytechnic, Aba, Abia State, Theodore Oji Establishment Act, he sponsored that bill, is awaiting. Sickle cell anemia prevention, control and management was done by Sam Ogu. Now, followed by him is Sam Ogu. Sam Ogu now did on this cell anemia prevention control. And then the next by Sam Ogu is public procurement. And then the next is warehouse receipt. The next is Federal College of Agriculture Establishment Act. The next by Theodore Oji is State Fund Act Amendment Bill of 2015 that passed first reading. All these have passed the first reading. Postgraduate Physiotherapy College of Nigeria Establishment.
All right, Dr. Usman, you've cited quite some examples. I would think that those examples will suffice. But I asked the question about legislative rigor and record and the right of constituents to seek to interrogate this. But if you join that to the point made by Afam Osigwe as to why there appears to be insufficient public awareness of the details of some of what you have read out, where do you think the gap lies? And then Rafsanjani himself also said that, look, senators, some of them, particularly perhaps the governors, who are former governors, have perhaps some challenge in interacting with their constituents. I mean, they seem not to be otherwise accountable.
I disagree about this, because some of these bills sponsored, for example, by Theodore Oji, comes from his constituents. For example, the National Fertilizer Quality Control comes from probably the stakeholders. But what about national planning process? And then his bill for Polytechnic, Abia State Polytechnic, and Federal College of Education. Those are yearnings of his people. And he has come there, and these things have first reading, and some of these things are at the committee meeting, awaiting committee report. So it's important also to understand the input from the constituency. A legislator cannot come and make serious contribution in the National Assembly, especially at the Senate, without input and push and pressure from his constituencies. And these guys have taken this input, they have taken this pressure to the gallery, to the National Assembly, and they have made serious contribution. And the lawyer there will agree with me that it's not easy to sponsor a bill. It's not easy for you to even have a bill to pass the first reading and then to pass the second reading. These guys have tried. Kabir Gaya also have tried. He has his own bills here that I've itemized. So also Kwankwaso on the issue of national grazing and reserve, and also nursing, and so many others. Ali Wamako on education, national planning. Now, we must understand that these contributions sometimes come from institutions. There could be amendment bills from the institutions that really need certain laws to be amended so that they are positioned well to serve the nation. But all the same, these guys have made their impact. On the issue of their general contribution, I beg to agree with you that it is very, very abysmal. It's so small with the kind of quantum of resources that goes to them and also that sponsors them and that maintains them in the house. I agree with that.
Thank you indeed, Dr. Usman Mohammed, CEO, Center for Legislative Studies in Africa. Thank you very much indeed. And gentlemen, we are talking about the preponderance of ex-governors being in the Senate. And in this current dispensation, we've had running battles between the Senate and the presidency in terms of signing bills and, of course, budgeting matters. Now, my question here is, does the presence of that caliber of politicians and the Senate impacting negatively on the presidency-Senate relationship in your understanding, having, of course, been in the country since 2015 that the 8th Assembly commenced? I'd like to ask Awal Musa Rafsanjani to comment here.
Okay, thank you very much. I think let me just also throw this in and so that people understand this in legislative work does not stop as, proposing bills. It has to do with constituency accountability. It has to do with the effective and responsible oversight. It has to do with the representation of the people. So it's not just about getting a lawyer to draft a law for you, on behalf of your constituency. If there's no public participation, the constituent participation, on that, it means that you are just engaging a lawyer to just draft a bill for you, just so that you will have a record that you have sponsored 20, 30 bills. Those are not necessarily the most important thing. Having a large number of bills that has no public, or does not have good governance attached to it, does not necessarily make you to be anything. And that is why my organization, from the next, legislative, calendar, we are going to be giving you a detail of what, each member in the House of Representatives and the Senate has actually contributed in terms of this key legislative responsibility, representation, lawmaking, of course, constituency accountability, and that's oversight, so that we would look at how many bills did you sponsor that has public bearing, that people really, when we're talking about poverty, when we're talking about reducing cost of governance, when we talk about human rights issues, when we talk about environmental, protection, these are the kind of bill or the bill that will help to increase or improve the economy of the country. Anything that is outside these major, key governance issues that will help, in terms of development, of the country, in terms of also, improving governance in the country, it is just a bill that people will just not even have any recall on it, So we want to members in the Senate and House of Representatives and even the executive to only consider or to propose bill that has direct bearing on Nigerian socio-economic and political development, not having, large number of bills that, government will not even, okay, you pass those bills and nobody even knows about them because there was not even much public participation in terms of other developing those bills or contributing to getting those in, in the National Assembly. Public hearing is important to have this in and be reflective of what people say, The other question that you mentioned, because of the ego that you have in most instances between these ex-governors in the Senate, the presidency sometimes, they don't really cooperate. So because as a governor, you are used to giving order. Now you come to the National Assembly where, everything will be subjected to debate and discussion. And if you think that you have this, and the president has to sign, also the president would feel like, he also has, the power to do whatever he wants to do. So at the end of the day, the current crisis that we have now, for example, if at all the ex-governors, had contributed in terms of resolving them, it will have been more useful to to me. But you can see so many important bills languishing in the National Assembly, like, PIB, is still there. The presidents of the ex-governors, none of them supported any of such kind of bill to ensure that the president eventually, assent to it, So there are so many important bills that I think, the country requires legislative, action on it, And this ex-governor have not been able to intervene between the president and the National Assembly. For me, if you are an ex-governor or ex-deputy governor, you should have also used your own political capital to make sure that the trouble that you have in the National Assembly, is actually addressed, between the executive and legislature. There should be harmony. There should be peaceful, resolution to some of this misunderstanding that are caused, not to come and be struggling for political power in the assembly. Because most of the, situation you find out that when they come, because they were ex-governor, they want to be given a juicy committee. They want to hijack, even the principal officer thing, even though the Senate now has, provision that only ranking members, in the Senate will have certain, position, in the Senate, But really, if the ex-governors can come to the assembly, contribute positively, not just turn that place into another ATM, I think, Nigerians would appreciate that. And if they will be talking, issues that affect Nigerians, poverty, unemployment, the corruption that is going on, which of the ex-governor has spoken against the looting that is going on in this country? I have not seen one of any of the ex-governor or deputy governor that has spoken to say, look, we will not support any looting and we will investigate. In fact, in most cases, when they are in the committee where you think they can act, they will not act because they don't want, because they know that in many instances they have done something wrong too. So they don't want to go and do anything that will begin to say, okay, you two, during your time, this is what you have done. So I think what we need to do is to really see how we can make this thing to be more participatory, more transparent, allow people to come in, don't ambush people from coming because you are a governor, because you have access to state resources to impose yourself. In most cases, you see these senators now, when you get a form to go for the Senate and you wanted to be a president like what we have seen in 2015 and even in this 2018, many of them who lost their primaries as presidential thing, they've already done arrangement with some of the people who had already secured senatorial ticket to now collect that now. Since I did not get the presidency, the president to be the candidate for this, now they will now collect that from somebody who might even be more useful than the governor. So I think it is important that Nigerians begin to open their eyes, and more importantly, political parties need to do something, because I think invariably political parties have responsibility to ensure that we sanitize this process, we make this process to be more transparent, more participatory, allow people who have something to offer based on their track record. If you are a governor, ex-governor, for goodness sake, there are so many ways in which you can contribute to governance. Being ex-governor, you have a lot. You can actually document even your experience. That will help students of political science. That will help a lot of people, researchers, who want to understand the intricacies, and the complication in governance process. And you can actually be even a consultant. But you don't need necessarily to say you must be in the Senate so that you can continue to take the political, lagoons.
All right, Rafsanjani, thank you very much. A number of points that you have raised. Afam Osigwe, I mean, Rafsanjani has talked about the lockup of the political space by aspiring former governors, because, of course, nobody can seek to contest it. But it talks about using the instrumentality of political parties to address this. And yet, what we have seen virtually since 1999 is the takeover of political party structures in the states by governors. And this is how it's been. So how then can you break the stranglehold of governors on the political parties to ensure that there's, as the saying goes, a level playing field for all aspirants, particularly to that of the Senate? That's one. The second point that I would like you to also address. Yes, it is often said that you like to that the Senate should be populated by experienced and seasoned administrators or professionals, persons who have seen it all and who therefore can bring their experience to bear on the issues that will be of moment to the Senate. But from what we have seen with regard to intergovernmental relations, particularly executive and legislative relations, this would appear to have been a major challenge for the senior citizens, if you like, or the experienced persons who are in the Senate, that in spite of the presence of these persons, the acrimony that you find between the legislature and the executive over, not just power flexing actually, rather than on substantive matters, that this hasn't been quite a benefit that ordinarily people would expect to derive from the presence of, say, former governors in the Senate.
Well, let me just say that the question you asked is an ideal, but as long as there is lack of intra or internal democracy in political parties, that will continue to elude us. Now you have a situation where governors more or less handpick those who lead the political parties either within the state, or a group of governors and past governors determine who gets elected into the national leadership of political parties. So you do not expect that the national leadership will say no to them. So it becomes a scratch my back, I scratch your back situation where the governors are pandered and where a governor could literally commit murder and get away with it because he is seen as the leader of the party in that state. And so he decides who gets what and who doesn't get what. And it's obvious in the fallout of party primaries in some of the states where the governors are insisting on having their way, even though their preferred candidate may not have won the election or the party primaries. Now, you talked about the issue of acrimony, their inability to. Now, many of them come into the legislature with what I call a Your Excellency mindset. So they are used to giving directions, like our Rafsanjani said, and they are not used to sitting down to debate and then have their way by the superiority of the argument. So they can't imagine that any person will just sit down there and tell them what. And then it's a constant power struggle. They want to be on top of everything. They want to be in what they call the juicy committees. Because of the pork barrel nature of the legislature in Nigeria, where people want to do oversight function in order to advance their personal interests. So this power interest will always be there because when people feel that they are not getting what they want, not necessarily whether the leadership is doing the right thing, or because they feel that's what a particular person, either a governor or a president, wants. So issues are not based on principle, but based on some other ulterior motive. So that's why we find it difficult for their real contribution to be allowed to come to the fore. And as long as, too, there are outside forces trying to destabilize the legislature, to influence the choice of who becomes what, and where disagreements are not seen as principal disagreements, but as personal insult, people take things personal. It's an affront to this person. Not respecting the fact that people may necessarily diverge on the opinions, and that does not mean that they have less respect for the person with whom they have disagreed with. So these are issues. The mindset, our attitude to politics as a do-or-die thing, as our personalization of political differences, and a desire to ultimately determine who gets what, rather than allowing the members of the legislature to determine and involve their own leadership and allow them to know that they have a particular constitutional duty to perform, which may not at all times align with the actual wish of the executive, but knowing that all these things are should be in the best interest of the nation. So I think if we're able to address some of these issues, we'll be fine.
All right, thank you, Mazi Afam Osigwe. Well, time is no longer on our side for us to continue this conversation, but Nigerians are also reacting to this conversation because everybody begins to think that once you conclude your term as a governor, the next is to get to the Senate. And we've been trying to see how we can digest the reason why and, of course, the consequences of doing so. Now, let's get to the tweets now. Akin Dada says, political career development in Nigeria is naturally patterned in such a way for governors to seek to retire to the Senate. They are free to do so as any other eligible citizen.
Mike Ayakwa tweets, now the Nigerian Senate intuitively has become a retiring hub of our governance, thanks to copycat syndrome in the polity. Now, although outgoing governors have the right to aspire to any elective position of their choice, the truth of the matter is that many of them use the instrumentality of their offices to achieve the goal.
All right, and Dela Jack Solomon says some of the governors who are definitely thinking of going to the Senate have left their states impoverished than when they met them. What did they forget on the corridors of power that is taking them to the Senate?
And another tweet from Amangbola Hon. It says the increasing penchant of two-term governors to turn the Red Chamber to retirement home is one of the reasons I've always campaigned for a unicameral legislature. It's an insult on our collective intelligence by any outgoing governor to seek to displace a serving senator to pave the way for himself.
All right, from Nelson, if we continue to allow these the governors to go to the Senate, we will soon have a lame duck Senate of legislators sleeping and waking up with millions of naira. That's about the last one we have for today, for this particular segment of Good Morning Nigeria. I wonder whether we have time to go for more questions, or do we just round off? All right, and let's begin our appreciation this morning with Dr. Usman Mohammed, the CEO of Center for Legislative Studies in Africa. He reached us all the way from Kaduna. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning, Dr. Usman. Dr. Usman.
Joe.
All right, and of course, Awal Musa Rafsanjani, Executive Director of Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC. Thank you very much for your contribution this morning on this show. And my brother Mazi Afamos Higwe, former NBA Secretary General, we thank you for your insight.
Thank you so very much for inviting.
All right, now, next for us now is to take you on sports.
Nigeria Super Eagles is present for a reaction from Libya in the return leg of